Hello YouTube and people of the interwebs, welcome back to another review video. Today we're reviewing Wicked. Well, Wicked Part 1. Yes, that's right, I did get to see it a couple of days early thanks to Sky VIP. Yesterday I travelled to Birmingham and got to experience the film on the big screen. But before I tell you my thoughts, spoiler-free thoughts by the way, because there's a couple of changes from the musical that people might be used to. I've got to point out that basically every critic review website is rating this film incredibly well. Like, look at its score on Rotten Tomatoes. I think the first thing I will say is I have almost no doubt that this will be the most successful Oz film ever, apart from, obviously, the original 1939 MGM film. I think these two Wicked movies are going to redefine Oz and make it, like, back in the minds of the public and kids of the new generations. Which is incredibly exciting because often, I mean, I've got an entire video on this if you want to go and check it out, but there's so many sequels and prequels to The Wizard of Oz that end up flopping. And it's nice that I think for once there's going to be an incredibly successful one. But why is it so successful? Let's dive into my review. The opening sequence alone, the first song, No One Mourns the Wicked, is just visually brilliant. Not only does the music absolutely slap, and the performances absolutely slap, but visually, the Land of Oz looks insanely good. There's a very clear blend of practical and CGI. It's not like 2013's Oz the Great and Powerful that's all too CGI. It is genuinely a spectacle to behold. And like the poppy fields, that there's a bunch of kids who run through like a bunch of flowered fields at the start of the film, those are all real. Like, you'll know what I mean when you see the film, but yeah, the blend of practical and CGI to make this world is insanely good. There wasn't a single shot in the entire film where I was like, oh, the effects there could have been a bit better. Like, the entire thing looks fantastic. After No One Mourns the Wicked as well, they have a nice little title card which is in the same sort of font as the original Wizard of Oz. And I think that's one thing that they clearly do. There's a lot of like intertextual references to the Wizard of Oz MGM film. I'll discuss more of those later on, but I think it's one of the reasons it's going to gel really well with the general public, because this Land of Oz still has its own vibe, its own unique feel, yet harkens back to a lot of nostalgic things. Anyway, the story has a lot added to it. Obviously, the runtime of this film, I think, is like 2 hours 40 minutes, which is about as long as the actual play, and obviously this is part 1. It's Act 1 has been stretched out to 2 hours 40, as will Act 2 next year. And I know a lot of people were worried about this. I'd say maybe the film could have been a little bit shorter, but everything they added felt incredibly necessary. Like, we saw bits of Elphaba's childhood, and there's a certain additional character who is with Elphaba in her childhood, where you understand why she empathises with the animals so much. And unlike the play as well, at the start of the film in these flashbacks, there's animals, like talking animals, everywhere. As the film goes on, that you see less and less animals. And for those of you who know the plot of the original musical, it ties in nicely. Everything added, I think, genuinely did help grow the characters and tell the story. And obviously people had concerns going in, that like, in a musical, when you break into song is when you can't just speak it. The emotion's so raw and powerful, you have to break into a song. And I don't think that really changes here. Like, none of the emotional songs are lost or really undermined, apart from one. I'd argue maybe this might be controversial, but you can come back to this video and tell me in the comments whether you think or not. I think Defying Gravity at the end, it's a brilliant spectacle, and I know we're jumping about in this review, but go with me on this. I think Defying Gravity at the end may have hit slightly harder if they hadn't included a couple of like extra moments. I feel like it slightly slowed down the song, and the build-up wasn't quite as good as watching the show in the theatre, but I don't know, I'd need to rewatch it, because I've only seen it once. But we'll get on to Defying Gravity in the end later on. At the core of this film are Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande. And I don't know whether it was just the social circles that I'm in, but a bunch of people before this film came out were worried that, oh no, Ariana Grande, she's not a musicals person. Her voice isn't suited to the role. Yes, it is. Both Glinda or Garlinda and Elphaba are fantastic. The dynamic between that pairing is just, it's brilliant. And I think what you get in this that obviously you don't get in the show is really intense close-ups of the characters. Like, you really, really feel their emotions. Obviously, there's ups and downs from doing something in a theatre where the audience are sat far away or making a movie, but yeah, the dynamic and the bond you get between these two feels so, so real. It's so good. And watching them change from sort of enemies into best friends, it's believable, it's funny, it's over the top, it's everything you want from an Oz film. And I know a lot of those words sound contrasting, but they're not. This film is such a good blend of like comedy and genuine real-world politics and real-world emotions. Although one thing that does slightly take me out of this Land of Oz, I don't know, maybe they do it in the original musical and I just looked over it, but the Ozification of words, it's a little bit hammy. Like, so many words are like wonderlicious or superbulous, and it's kind of like, just say wonderful. But that might just be a me thing, and maybe that's in the original musical and I just completely forgot that. I was also worried going in that certain cast members would look too old, because I think like Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo are in their like 30s, like mid-30s I think. And obviously they're playing university students who are like 20 or like 19, 18. But I don't know whether it was the makeup. Everyone looked age appropriate. Like, I thought it would take me out of the musical. You know, like films like Dear Evan Hansen, where they're clearly like, that is not a school student. It didn't feel like that. Like, it all blended together really, really nicely. I think whoever did the casting for this film, like, props to them. And the guy playing Fiyero as well, like, normally he just looks like a man, but he looked younger in this. You could argue he looked a bit too old for university, but I don't know, I think it works nicely. I think all the other characters as well, like the wizard, the casting of Jeff Goldblum is just fantastic. Like, he doesn't get too much to do in part one, but you can see through the facade, and it's really nice because when Elphaba arrives in the Emerald City, he's quite anxious because I think he kind of knows she's not going to like what's happening with the animals. So he's trying to keep it on the down low, but Madame Morrible is kind of the one who ends up revealing to Elphaba the truth behind all of this. Madame Morrible, she's pretty good as well, although I don't think, like, the actress is very good, but certain times I wanted more power behind her voice. Not whilst she's singing, but like, you know that speech where she's like, there's an evil witch in Oz, a wicked witch. She doesn't shout it, which is fair enough, that's like a performance choice, but I really think moments like that, you need to yell. She stayed relatively calm throughout the whole thing. I think in the propaganda moments where she's saying to the citizens of the Emerald City, the witch is evil, you really, like, that should have been shouted. It should have had a lot more dramatic weight to it than it did. But I mean, that's a minor complaint, and one of my only complaints of the entire film. I loved that they gave Dr. Dillamond more to do, and Dr. Dillamond, by the way, looks fantastic. He's played by Peter Dinklage, which the voice is so recognisable. But we actually get to see more animals with Dr. Dillamond. Like, there's a section where I thought, oh no, have they cut the Something Bad is Happening in Oz song? But they didn't, they just left it till a little bit later on in a different setting, and it worked so well. And actually seeing, like, the Oz equivalent of the Gestapo on screen was genuinely quite hard-hitting. And, like, Dr. Dillamond gets bundled out of the lesson, and it's genuinely, like, you get really emotionally invested in this film. And obviously it's very hard-hitting with the whole, ooh, the best way to bring people together is a common enemy. And Glinda's song Popular as well, saying, like, what do you notice about world leaders? Oh, they're popular. You don't need brains or knowledge. Look at the current state of the world, and I think you'll realise Glinda was onto something. But away from politics. There were so many fun cameos and references. I mean, one that initially jumps out to me. I'm pretty sure I heard the name drop. Maybe I'm just delusional, but I'm pretty sure they name drop Mumby from Return to Oz. And obviously the book, The Marvellous Land of Oz. And I'm probably the only person in the cinema who got that, but I was sat there like, hey, they said the name. There's another bit as well. If you're a fan of the Broadway musical, I won't spoil what happens, but there's a little bit where I was like, whoa! That, if you come back after watching this film, you'll know what that whoa was in aid of. But yeah, there's a very fun sequence. It's kind of similar to like... No, I don't want to spoil it, but when they arrive at the Emerald City, you'll know what I mean. I think it's during the One Short Day in the Emerald City, like, song, the sequence. For fans of the musical, you'll be very happy. There's also a lot of, like, recreated shots from The Wizard of Oz. Like, it's not really a spoiler, but when the witch helps the little cowardly lion, she puts him in the basket on the back of her bike, and she's riding it exactly like Miss Gulch at the start of the 1939 film. And you even get a recreation of the shot where, like, you know how Toto pops his head out of the basket? The lion does the same thing. And there's so many nice little intertextual references. It's very fun. And as well, the foreshadowing. Like, if you know where part 2 goes, the foreshadowing in part 1 is insane. Almost every single character has at least one line where it's like, oh, that's what happens to them at the end of the film, or that's what their main event in part 2 is. There's so much foreshadowing, it's fantastic. Because I really think as well that'll add to the rewatchability of this film. Now obviously the film is a musical, as are most Oz adaptations, and the songs are done brilliantly. I'm so glad we didn't end up with like a 2017 Beauty and the Beast scenario where it's just auto-tune, auto-tune, auto-tune. I don't think I noticed any auto-tune apart from possibly one note during Dancing Through Life. But the musical sequences are visually fantastic. They sound fantastic. Like, everything about them comes really, really well together to create something magical. And people online had been worried about like the colour grading and the overexposure of certain scenes and the Marvelification of modern movies. This film is so vibrant, so eye-catching. There's only one scene which I'd say Dancing Through Life possibly is, like, the outside bit feels a little bit overexposed, and some of the colours are slightly bizarrely washed out. Like Glinda and Fiyero dancing, there's a lot of like lens flare, which is a unique artistic choice. But that was the only time I really noticed anything slightly wonky with the colouring of the film. Let's just talk about the choreography of it as well. I'm no dance expert, but the dances, all of it was so good. If I were to give 3 highlights, what have I written down over here? Popular was directed amazingly. While editing, I've realised I kept referring to Loathing, the song, like Unadulterated Loathing, whatever the heck it's called. I kept referring to that as Popular. Don't get me wrong, Popular was directed really, really well. Like, cool visuals. But Loathing, I think that's what it's called. Loathing is the song which has all the cool split-screen stuff going on. And it tells such a fun story. It shows Glinda and Elphaba in different parts of the university, and it's like a little time jump montage as well, as they grow into their enemy status. But it's so visually unique, visually different, and it doesn't feel like something you'd normally see in a musical. It was, very good sequence. Popular was definitely up there with one of the best moments of this film. Dancing Through Life, despite the exposure problems, was so cool. Like, the guy playing Fiyero, who's in Doctor Who, his name escapes me at the moment, but he is, I think, Jonathan Bailey, I think that's his name. He's fantastic. Like, the charisma this man has, it's just brilliant. And then, obviously, Defying Gravity was, like, what a highlight. And No One Mourns the Wicked right at the beginning was brilliant as well. Look, all the musical numbers are fantastic. What they do that's quite interesting as well is, rather than just playing the song interrupted, each song takes about, maybe I'm off with my timings, but about 7 to 10 minutes, because in between bits of each chorus, they have little bits of dialogue or little bits of story happening, and for the most part I think it blends really, really well. The only time it felt a little bit jarring was in Defying Gravity. And let's talk about Defying Gravity now, because it's the big moment. I think it's what everyone who's ever seen Wicked or heard of Wicked knows, is Defying Gravity is the big musical number that's come from this film. And obviously it's tricky to adapt to screen, because on stage the spectacle comes from the fact that an actress you're watching live is lifted off the ground and all the guards are flung back and there's flying monkeys, and that's where the spectacle comes from. But a character lifting off the ground isn't that interesting visually in a film. So obviously they had their work cut out for them, and I think visually it's fantastic. I have no problems with it. There's no ropey CGI. In fact, a lot of it's practical. Like, they actually had Cynthia Erivo flying round on strings. Obviously on a green screen, because the Emerald City isn't real. But it's blended together brilliantly. Before I fully get on to Defying Gravity, we'll talk about the build-up, because that's another thing maybe the film could have done slightly better. But I think it also goes for the original musical as well. But the switch-up on Elphaba's switch-up on the wizard is completely justified. Like, you completely see her dreams shattering before her eyes, and she's like, you have no real power. Like, the delivery of all of that is brilliant. And as I said earlier, you can see the wizard is slightly apprehensive throughout the whole thing. I still don't quite get why Madame Morrible goes from 0 to 100 so quickly. Like, Elphaba runs away with the sacred book or whatever it is. I think it's called the Grimoire. Elphaba runs away with the Grimoire. And then the wizard and Madame Morrible are like, oh, okay, Glinda, go and get her. And they don't even wait for Glinda to come back. Like, Madame Morrible then immediately goes, right, flying monkeys, go and get her. And they don't even wait for the flying monkeys to get her. Immediately, she just goes and gives this propaganda speech, and I feel like we needed to see each of those attempts failing, and Madame Morrible and the wizard's reaction to going, oh god, are we going to have to, we're going to have to fully make Elphaba the enemy. Instead, it just kind of happens in really quick succession. Yeah, that's a minor complaint, because the rest of the sequence is insane. It is so good. They add a little action sequence. I won't spoil what happens, but it felt like a proper film sequence that you couldn't do on stage before Defying Gravity happens. Like, the guards are all chasing Elphaba and Glinda, and then you get this really cool action sequence, some fire, they jump out, and then they're on the roof. And it's so good if you've seen the musical, because you know it's coming. Like, you can feel it. And when the initial, like, boom, I hope you're happy, boom, I hope you're happy now comes in, it's so, like, yeah, like the audience you could hear them going, like, gasping and wanting to break into song as well. In fact, one person at the back of the cinema did start singing along to it, only for a little bit though, because if they'd done that throughout the whole song, I'd have probably got up and told them to shut up. I mean, realistically, I wouldn't. I'd have politely sat there and been mildly annoyed. But yeah, the sequence itself is fantastic. The only downside, which I've said about 3 times in this video, is they break up each chorus with a little bit of, like, dialogue. Now, obviously, the musical does this as well. But the bit before Elphaba screams, "It's me," there's, like, this little touch, which it's quite nice, and I can see how, like, in a script, I get why you'd write it. Like, it helps with the characterisation and stuff of Elphaba. Like, she's falling, and I won't spoil it, but I just thought it interrupts the flow of the music, because I was kind of sat there going, oh, come on, get to the chorus, keep singing, keep singing, keep singing, and they break it up into little chunks. But then I suppose that's how you get the spectacle that you lose from doing it on screen. Because as I said, the spectacle on the show comes from the fact that someone's actually levitating. You lose that spectacle in a film, so how do you adapt it and change it to make it more impactful for a film? Well, I think they did a very good job. But those are the only complaints I can come up with, because apart from that, it's visually stunning, the performances are brilliant, what happens to the Emerald City is fantastic, and watching the witch fly around and all the monkeys go with her, it's such like a triumphant moment and the peak of Elphaba's character. And obviously it's only part 1, so it ends after Defying Gravity. It ends in the break. And I have to say it does feel like a part 1, which is a little bit of a shame, because it's kind of like, I want to see more, but then that's a good thing. And I am glad they did it in 2 parts. It still does feel like its own movie though, because it wraps up, like, the turn into the Wicked Witch. Like, you could technically watch this film and never see part 2, and then go into The Wizard of Oz like, oh, I know how the Wicked Witch was born. But yeah, I'm very excited for part 2, and I think it's going to be fantastic. Overall, I'd rate this film a solid 9 out of 10. Like, it's not perfect, but it's very, very close. It's, as I said at the start, definitely going to be the most loved Oz adaptation apart from the 1939 film. I'm almost sure of that. One day we'll get justice for Return to Oz. Let's get the public back on board with that. That does bring us to the end of today's review. If you did enjoy, please do remember, as ever, to like, comment, subscribe, and share. It really helps me out a lot. This channel doesn't just have Oz stuff, though. It's got Doctor Who, Star Wars, it's got a load of stuff. If you like movies, you like TV, you like pop culture, subscribe to this channel. You don't want to miss out. Thank you very much for watching. You can also check me out on Patreon, by the way, if that floats your boat. Goodbye! Obviously, at the heart of this film are Cynthia Erivo and At the core of this film are Cynthia Erivo and At the core of this film are Cynthia Erivo and... At the core of this film are Cynthia Erivo... F***ing hell. At the core of this film are Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande.